Welcome to the Outer Realms with Michelle DeRoche and Amelia Pisano. Airing live on the United Public Radio Network, 105.3 FM in New Orleans.
Hello, hello. I can't hear you for some reason. Yay, I can now. There
I just did my whole intro and nobody could hear me.
Ah!
So that's okay. Yeah. Let me just go over it real quick again. Sorry, everybody.
No, you might want to do that again. Yeah.
I know I have sort of like my a bit of fog going on because I'm a little bit under the weather, but just to clarify with everybody that this is a pre-recorded show. You have to check it out this evening. Of course, Amelia and I will be in the chat room with you all. So make sure that you check it out. Note that we are broadcasting on United Public Radio Network, UFO Paranormal Radio Network 105.3 from the beautiful city of New Orleans. So again, big thank you to Folgers Coffee, our sponsor. Big thank you to Dr. Snick, Justin Snicker, and of course, Steve McGinnis, who's responsible for all of our artwork. So we're going to leave that right there before I blunder anymore. How are you?
Oh, not bad at all. I'm glad we got that one out of the way at the beginning. Otherwise, it would have been a very quiet interview.
I think so. I think you could hold it, though, without any problems. So.
Oh, on my own. Maybe, but yeah, I don't know your listeners like you do.
Oh, my gosh. It's been a day already. But and of course, Amelia's having her own day because her internet went down. So she's apologizing for not being here. And I know. It's just, it's been crazy weather. Everybody around here seems to have this head cold thing going on, and
we have exactly the same thing here. Everybody's I've got it as well, and it takes weeks to get rid of.
Yeah,
it takes ages.
It hangs in there.
Yeah.
Right? I'm all fuzzy headed, so it could be a real interesting interview, as you can see.
Well, it was just us two last time, as well as I recall. So there's a pattern emerging here. Oh dear.
Oh my gosh. Here I was thinking, I'm just going to put this out, let it play tonight. I'm thinking, nope, now I'm going to have to come in, get back on the soundboard and cut that whole part off, start it off where we have sound. It's outstanding, but that's okay.
You're here now.
I know, we're here now. I'm really excited about this segment. Of course, I'm always excited when you come on because you're a wealth of information. But I guess in keeping with the Halloween season and everything that's, spooky yet, supernatural, we were going to come up with some really good, juicy stuff. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what you have for us. And I'm going to let you start wherever you like. Do you want to talk about wizards, witches, vampires, you name it?
I was kind of hoping you were going to push everything along with the questions.
I could do it. I could do it.
I was going to say, I can give us a very brief catch up on last time. Do you remember the last interview we did? We made my publisher, Philip, feel incredibly guilty because he didn't take the King Arthur book. Do you remember that? We did a whole section on that. And then he came back to me and he went, yeah, go on then. I'll have that. Well, I've got a bit of an announcement to make because I finally got the first proof copy through. Hey, there it is. So all credit to you guys for pushing him along. It's a bit of a monster.
No wonder he was kind of debating it.
Yeah, it's
a beast.
I think it's the biggest thing he's ever done. But even now he's talking about making it dimensionally bigger. So I'm quite pleased with the progress. I think he's really getting into this. So that's a kind of the first ever time the covers appeared anywhere. And of course, there's Joseph on this side and Merlin on that side, and good old Arthur sat right in the middle. There he is. So,
I love it.
Isn't
am
that amazing?
So thrilled.
And that's as close as you're going to ever get to what they might have really looked like. So there we go.
Wow.
That's that out of the way. So we've made real
congratulations.
progress.
Excellent news,
I'm hoping November. That's when we're hoping. It should be on Amazon in November. No idea. The price will be somewhere between 20 and 30 English pounds.
This November.
Yeah. Right.
It's quick.
Weeks away. We're just a few weeks away. Well, it was ready to go. This is what I tried to get over. I was trying to say to Philip, I've finished it. It took 55 hours. I did it. I did all the layout, all the text, everything. It looks exactly like all his other books. I just copied the format. So I sent him a finished book. In fact, it took us about 4 or 5 weeks waiting for the artist to do the cover.
Right. He doesn't mess around, right? Like when he decides I'm on it, he's like on it.
Yeah, he is. He really is. So that's a good place to start. It's the magic of the season. It appears that we've opened the portals to the dead of the past, and they are flooding through. Here comes a whole load of information from the Dark Ages, heading our way.
I love it. I love it. I think it's fantastic. Just a little book too, I see.
Oh yeah, it's only tiny. I think the last count it was about 10 pages off 500 pages, so it's 400 odd. But it does cover all 3 characters plus all the stuff that has come out since and all of the historical time periods. It's like the diary of King Arthur, so it's like everything you would ever want to know. But the difference is it's real, it's genuine, it's all historical source material, archaeology, no nonsense. In fact, I have a go at 1 or 2 people for putting nonsense in their books somewhere in those pages.
I love it.
But hopefully it'll pull it all down to reality.
Yes,
there we go.
I love it.
How's that for a start? There you go. You weren't expecting that.
That is a wonderful start. That is fantastic.
That is my gift to you. There you go. So New Orleans and yourselves have got it before anybody else.
No, I appreciate that. We always love breaking news here on the Outer Realm. Are you kidding?
Well, I got that about 3 days ago, so it's proper hot news. So yeah,
I love it. I'm a big, I've always been so enchanted by the story, and it's just one of those things that was it real? Did he exist? Was it a thing? And I know we're going to do a show on it, so I'm really looking forward to it.
I'm not going to give too much away till we get to the show, but of course that does mean the book will be available by then. It'll be in circulation by then, I would think. So if everybody wants to be prepared for that interview, they should dash out and buy the book. There you go. In November.
There we go, people. There we go. Don't be holding back. Go check it out. Obviously getting your money's worth. See the size of that baby?
Oh yeah. It's well worth it. Honestly, it's well worth it. There's loads in there. Well, it only took 45 years to write. So
I was going to say, how long did that take you?
So
45 years, man.
Yeah, I started on it in 1977. So it's done. Yeah.
I'm looking really forward to that. I am. I really am. You know, and speaking of wizards, I mean, are we going to talk a little bit about Merlin and your wizard?
It's
Talk.
as good a place to start as any. Yeah.
I thought it would be a good segue in. Yeah.
Yeah, it will be.
Okay.
Well, depends. I suppose looking at it from a 20th century point of view, 21st century point of view, it depends where wizards have actually arrived. I think in those days, which is the Dark Ages, the modern idea of a wizard sort of, I can almost say, oozes out of the idea of a late period druid. So basically what the druids were in antiquity is what wizards gradually become in our time frame. So there is a kind of invisible, unacknowledged link between the two. Merlin makes that link because he is one of a number of Merlins. There's actually two of them during Arthur's lifetime. And I've got in the book, I think I've got 7 of them. Starts off with Taliesin, finishes up with a guy up in Scotland. But they're only there for a period as Merlins of maybe a couple of 100 years. And then you start to see sort of the Anglo-Saxon way of the weird kind of magician creeping in. And then, of course, you get the Wicca and the witchcraft and those kind of things coming in as well. So over a period of about 1,000 years, it's developed into the kind of wizards we have now, that have sort of won dueling competitions in the Harry Potter movies and what have you, you know, which I'm not exactly sure they used to do that, you know.
I know, it's all wizard wars. I love it.
Yeah, well, I've got to tell you, I mean, anybody that kind of is into wizardry and stuff like that, we all sort of had a laugh because you've got these people pointing, you know, wands of power at each other. But in magical circles, basically your wand is that. It's your finger. You know, a wand is basically a pointing stick for focusing your intent or magic or energy or whatever. So there's all these people running around with these amazing technological pieces of wood that they're, you know, throwing spells at each other.
But they look cool.
Well, yeah, they do. They do. You know. Yeah.
You know.
You look a bit daft, sort of pointing your finger and hoping that, you know, electric bolts would come out of it. I suppose.
Careful who you're pointing at. You might show some intention. Somebody's
have somebody's eye out with that. Magic. You have somebody's third eye out with that. Sorry, I couldn't resist that.
Exactly. No, it's true. You're not wrong. I love it. You made comments of Merlins. Like, so Merlin wasn't like so much a name as it was
a title. Yeah. There's, I mean, it took me ages to find where it is in the book, but I just off memory, I know the first one I think I found was Merlin Taliesin. Then you got Merlin Ambrosius, which is Uther Pendragon's brother. Then you got Merlin Le Logan, who is the old guy who starts off the whole Arthurian thing. So he's kind of old enough to remember the Romans leaving Britain. So he sees Arthur as being the savior of the old Roman ways. You know, he's going to bring back old magic, old druidry, old ways of doing things. But he then, after the Battle of Baden, when Arthur's victorious, he dies, and his replacement is a guy called Merlin Willett, or Merlin the Mad. And he's the one who, after Arthur's died and after the defeat, he ends up witnessing like the battles, the interracial battles between the Welsh, where they're fighting their own kind, and he slowly goes mad and he finishes up, I think, somewhere in Cumbria. And then the next one, I can't remember his last name, he's a guy somewhere up in the lowlands of Scotland, and he's in contact with another guy who's very similar in Ireland. So they are the dying embers, if you like, of the Romano-pagan druidic race of folks, because the Druids were just they were kind of Greek philosophers and natural. They were into natural magic, natural magicians, if you like, and they embraced in the later years a lot of Christianity, because they were one of the 2 classes that were persecuted by the Romans. You couldn't be a Christian if you couldn't be a Roman citizen if you were a Christian, and you couldn't be a Roman citizen if you were a Druid. They were basically banned. One's a religious dissident, the other one's a political dissident, because the Druids never stopped telling the Celts to fight. You know, and that's carried on. It's carried on into magic. That's kind of what magicians are. They're always seen as being, you know, left field, as being detached from society, as being different, with vast religious or philosophical knowledge, magical knowledge, you know. that's ballooned, really. That's since kind of the 1600s, it's really gone nuts. Because in the 1500s, we had people like Dr. John Dee, who was hired by Queen Elizabeth as her protector magician, because an interesting one, that she was walking on, I think it was Hampstead Heath, and somebody who didn't like Queen Elizabeth had nailed a doll of Queen Elizabeth to a tree and stuck it full of pins. So can you imagine the Queen comes face to face with that, and she's like, "Oh, what do we do about this? You know, we need counter magic." You know, so that's why people say, "Well, John Dee, Dr. John Dee, was the first 007." Because he's a counter agent, if you like. He's working against the forces of evil, and that really I mean, Dr. John Dee. That's when magicians just take off. You know, after that, the Elizabethan times. Then from there on, apart from a really bad patch with the Puritans over here in America in the 1600s, you know, they were not popular then. But then it's grown as like a movement since then. So magus, magi, magicians, you know, all these people. Chief druids, they all have different titles. Magisters, that's another one.
I think it's really it's fascinating. I think how many children just grow up in the allure of, you know, ancient wizards and all of this power and this knowledge. They don't really realize, you know, that it was truly a belief and a way of life. That just died out like so many things did. But I mean, did they die out? Because I think, which brings us into the 20th century, I think, where you've had the esoteric and the occult practitioners who call themselves also, you know, wizards or warlocks, that sort of thing.
Well, coming out of doing the research I did on Merlin and the Merlins, you really get the impression, even just bracketing that one group of people, you get the impression that there are magicians, there are Merlins for every season, every time and every season. You know, every period in history, you can point to its own version of what a magician might be. So like, you know, go back 150 years, you'd probably be looking at the Aleister Crowleys of this world, people like that. And the head witches, you know, Alexanders and Gardner, and they would all be regarded as that. Nowadays, it's different again. There are people out there practicing the occult that are quite prominent characters. They might now be regarded as the magicians for this day and age. You know, each time you go back, you end up with this list of leading characters in magic that kind of fit the bill. And I don't think there's ever been a time when they've never been there. They've always been there. You know, somewhere in the world, there's always some old bloke practicing magic. You know? Just thinking earlier on, when you're talking about kids and all the rest of it, can you imagine that going to a job, not a job interview, going to one of these interviews that they have at schools and colleges, you know, and what do you want to be when you grow up, Sonny? You know, and you go, I want to be a wizard. You know, I want to graduate as a wizard, you know. Imagine the careers advisor going, well, that's not a proper job, you know, and then this little lad looking at him going, oh yes it is, and just going boom, vanishing.
Exactly.
Who's like,
who says
what just happened? Yeah, exactly.
I know. Who says it's not proper? How's this for proper? Oh no, my gosh, I love it. You know, it's I agree with you. I think do you think it's something that is pretty much underground with practitioners, or, you know, I think the real serious ones aren't the ones that are out there.
Yeah, I'll tell you a story, because my very, very, very distant background before I got into the church and I qualified as a vicar and all that sort of thing, way back when I was a kid, when it was like in the 1970s, there was still hippie colonies and hippies around and things like that. I used to hang out. I used to hang out with this bunch of older hippies that was in a village near us, and they had a coven that was attached to what they were doing. And I met loads of them. I met the guy that was in charge of that. He was a magister, so I met these different people. He definitely back then, even back in the 70s, he had this attitude where none of them want to go public because they're all waiting for the persecution times to return. You know, well, back in the 60s, well, the 50s, if you like, they only repealed the Witchcraft Act in the UK in 1953. So you go back to the 1950s, nobody actually believed that the act had been repealed. You know, in the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, possibly even in the 1980s, people were saying, well, you know, they're going to bring it back. They're going to bring the Witchcraft Act back. And they're just doing this to get us to come out, you know, and reveal ourselves and state who we are. And then next minute, you know, it'll be the burning times again and all this, that, and the other. And that attitude has prevailed. You know, like you say, if there's anybody out there that's really good at it, you know, who's going to be out there this Halloween, you know, chatting to his ancestors, you know, sat in a graveyard surrounded by figures that look like they come out of Star Wars, you know, these see-through things that come through from the other side. You know, if somebody's doing that, there's absolutely no way that person is going to tell anybody. They're just not, you know, you fell off the edge of the world when you go into realms like that. So I think, most of them
entire
are
secret societies that are, you know, pretty hardcore with this, you know, look into Luciferians, Rosicrucians, and that's a whole other.
Dawn, higher up in Freemasonry. There's quite a few. Yeah, there's tons.
Now, do you think though that it's because of it's more of an ancient knowledge thing than it is a, you know, a society where we just like running around in robes sort of thing? Like, and I'm not trying to be, but I'm just saying there's a lot of people that really don't have an idea of exactly how significant this is.
No, I think a lot of people have missed it. I'll start at the beginning when you're mentioning sort of historically, you know, and what have you. I mean, if you go all the way back to what we know of Bible manuscripts, if you go back to the Old Testament manuscripts, so you're now looking 3,000 to 4,000 years ago, you know, you're truly into the BC period. There is absolutely no way that there would be so much written about witchcraft and the occult and contacting the dead and casting spells, etc. There would be nothing at all written about that in the Bible unless it was real. That's your starting point. Clearly, people at that point in history were either really doing it or genuinely believed that it was real at that point. So you're starting off almost with an assumption that it's real. You know, I mean, why would God speak out against doing these practices if these practices didn't exist and they didn't work? You know, so there's that argument. Then as you start moving forward, like you say, people then start to discover more and more things that do work. Now, then you've got is it good to do this? You know, is it a moral or a practical, you know, argument? You know, there are a lot of things we can do that are really bad for us, you know, as human beings. So somewhere down the line, somebody somewhere would make a moral judgment. I think perhaps the definition of a magician is someone who either has a different set of morals or makes different sets of moral judgments. So it sends them off in directions that the average person wouldn't go in. And most of the average people are quite happy to sit there and go, okay, you want to do that? Off you go. We're not going to do it, but we'll all sit and watch and see what happens, you know. So then you finish up with the poor old Alistair Crowley, you know, kind of characters who are off there, you know, conjuring demons and chatting to the devil and this, that, and the other. And the next minute he's a mess. He's completely wrecked. You know, his life's over. But he's gone out there and done it. I mean, Crowley he didn't mince his words. He actually said, I am doing this as an experiment. You know, if it works, it works, and blow the consequences. And there are consequences. So I think, there are dangers, so people sit back. And there are also this idea that, yes, it is very, very ancient. It's been around a long time. You know, so again, people avoid that. And they've got this idea that magic is something that, you know, is specialized and you have to study, and, you know, it's really detailed and all the rest of it. And yet the more you get into magic, the more you realize that it's actually there anyway. If you know what I mean, if you know where to look, if your eyes are opened, it's, you know, you wake up in the morning, you get out of bed, and from that point on, the rest of your day is magic, whether you like it or not. You know, it is. And again, that goes back to this idea that we're all kind of little gods. We all have powers and abilities, and, you know, like it or not, you are going to change the world. You know, it's going to happen that way. You know, if billions of people all around planet Earth all get together on Halloween, which they do, then that's going to generate enough energy then for things to happen. You know, you'd expect that to happen. You know, so Yeah, absolutely. And I think to some extent, yes, you can go off and you can study the OTO or, whatever. You can go and do all that. You can do all the studying work and that, or just be aware as a human being of what you're capable of and what you're doing on a day-to-day basis. It's it's a bit crazy, really, because some people kind of sit there and go, oh, do you know what? I really wish I had whatever, a bicycle or something, and then the next week, the next door neighbor goes, I'm getting rid of a bicycle. Yeah. And they don't make the connection, to someone who's magical. That's obvious. You can tell what's just happened.
Like synchronicities, just putting it out there.
But did it happen because it was supposed to happen? It was going to happen anyway, or did you actually do something to the timeline, to the environment? Was your intent sufficient? Not maybe to make it happen, but to tip the circumstances in your favour, because that's all magic is. If you get any of the top witches and wizards and people in the occult, if you get hold of them and you say, what are you actually doing? They will say, we've got reality, we've got the planet around us, we're pushing it. That's what we're doing. We're giving information into that matrix and we're giving it a shove. That's all we're doing. So we don't have the power to part the Red Sea or raise people from the dead or, whatever. That's super stuff. That probably disappeared with Jesus, who was the last of the Egyptians, basically, because that's where he got most of that from.
Like necromancing, things of that nature.
Goodness only knows, that was God's power, whether it was him as a god or him as God, or whether he borrowed it from God, that's a theological debate. But at the end of the day, the end result was something that only God could do. So there are limits. I think there are limits as to how far we can go. The idea of name it and claim it, nab it and grab it, and all this idea that, I'm going to have 1,000 million trillion pounds by the end of the year, no, you're just not that powerful, as a creature. That's not going to happen. But the chances that you might be able to attract a bicycle,
it's pretty good. yeah, it's a big achievement.
Have a go. You know what I mean?
But there are people who truly believe. Like, I'm a believer in mindset, and a lot of people believe in the power of the mind.
Absolutely.
There are people out there. I'll use necromancing just as an example because we just said it's something that really can't be done. There are people who believe it really can be done. I was contacted a few years ago. I say a few years ago, a couple of decades ago, and somebody said, I'd like you to help me do this, bring my husband back. I'm like, what? And where in your mind do you think I can be instrumental in any of this?
Well, it's back to what I said in what I just said then. There's some things that we can do, and maybe we shouldn't be doing them. You know what I mean? It's not for us. It's not in our limit. I'm not saying they can't be done. You've got the Witch of Endor in the Old Testament. She brings the high priest back. I think his name was Samuel. Brings him back for Saul, who's king at that time. So she can't refuse the king. She's doing it at a royal order. What's really shocking is that she's amazed and the king's amazed because he comes back. He actually comes back when he's asked to, and they're like, "Oh, I wish we'd not done this." So that's the first sign of something like that going wrong, and that's probably 1600 BC, something like that. It went wrong then, so there's a pretty good chance it's going to go wrong now.
It's probably going to go more wrong now because people are just in a hurry now. Nobody takes the time to do it. You come back and end up with a half a person or something.
It's like, or you dial somebody up on a Ouija board, and you think you forget to say goodbye. And then you wonder why the rest of your day, week, month, life starts going downhill really quick.
I've seen it.
Yeah, because you brought something in and it sat there like, well, you asked me to be here, kind of thing. I'm just doing what I'm here to do. Because I don't think, no matter how powerful you are as a magician, I don't think you fully get a handle on what's going on in the invisible. It's like going into the deep sea and thinking that you can survive, without air tanks and a wetsuit. Unless you're prepared for that environment. It's not something we can just do off the cuff, A bunch of kids with a candle in a graveyard, at midnight on Halloween trying to conjure up spirits. That is really dangerous because you're at the bottom of the Marianas Trench without a wetsuit and tanks, under high pressure from an environment that you're just not supposed to be in. We're not designed to go there. So from a practical point of view, that's one you definitely should leave to the high magicians, the high magic folks, because at least they've got some idea of what they're doing. it's funny actually, because everyone's got this idea of what magic's all about. If you grab hold of some of these guys who are high up in the organizations, they will tell you to leave it well alone.
Right.
Because they've all had bad experiences.
Right.
I mean, the classic one with Ouija boards is, something comes through and it's your Auntie Nellie. Your Auntie Nellie comes through and goes, "Hi, it's Auntie Nellie here. And just to prove it, I had a bad leg when I was alive, And then, half an hour later, you've got this lying spirit that's throwing things around the room and causing chaos. Because the invisible know that your Auntie Nellie had a bad leg before she died. Because they can see us the same way that we can see them.
That's right. So, I agree. And that's the biggest, the most popular way, I think, of people getting their bit of magic, is the spirit communication. And I always say there's a lot of lower laying entities that just wait for the opportunity to come through. And if they need help, maybe you shouldn't be asking them to come through.
Yeah, a lot of the
reason they need help.
Yeah, right? If you go back and you study the writings, you study things from the past, the grimoires and whatnot.
Yes.
Half of it, if not 3/4 of it, tells you how to get out of trouble and how to keep things away and how to be safe. And this kind of thing. I mean, the classic one is conjuring a magic circle. Everybody nowadays, without fail, gets in the middle of the magic circle and starts waving wands and staffs and candles and incense and goodness knows what around. But you go back to the old grimoires, you go back to the days of John Dee and what have you. No, the guy that's doing it, the practitioner, is outside the circle.
Because
the circle's the protection. It's there to keep whatever it is that turns up
in the
controlled.
Circle.
Exactly.
Meanwhile, you're in there with it.
It's like getting in a cage with a lion. It's crackers. But they've completely reversed the rules,
Read your grimoires, people. I know. I think he's watching too much telly because that's pretty much what they show. Get in the circle and you put the salt around and you've got everything. Just don't break the circle. Don't break the salt line. But meanwhile, it's completely opposite.
Yeah, because the focus of all magic, actually, if you draw a circle, is the spot in the center of the circle. That's where everything is focused and concentrated. It doesn't matter what you stick on it. You can have hexagrams, pentagrams, octograms, whatever. The spot in the middle, mathematically, that's your center of power.
Right.
So if you're stood in the middle of that circle and all of a sudden, boom, something turns up with horns, it's going to turn up on that spot right where you are if you're in the middle of it. And from anyone that's ever practiced magic, I mean, there's going to be loads of people out there into covens and goodness knows where else. They will know that what I'm saying is absolutely true because they'll have had experiences where people have been in the middle and something's turned up and it's not gone well.
Instant attachment. Possession.
Well, yeah. On the other hand, most sensible covens meet as a circle, and there's a reason for that. They stay outside the protection, which is what it's there for.
Right.
I'll tell you what's really creepy, and this is going to be fantastic, and I've got to do this at this point in the interview, okay? There's all these people now out there that'll be tuning in. They'll all be tuning into this interview going, oh, this is something for Halloween, isn't it? And it's for Halloween. It's and then all of a sudden this last bit will have come up and they'll all be like, oh, that's a bit too real, isn't it? That's a bit too realistic and creepy for Halloween. So they're all going to be running out the room screaming by this point.
Note to self, don't stand in the circle.
Exactly, yeah. Oh no, this guy thinks something's going to turn up. We're not talking movies, are we? We're not talking sort of theory. This is proper stuff, which is what you want for Halloween. If you.
Well, absolutely. People don't try this at home.
No, really.
I mean, let's go back to. I guess talking about things like that, we could probably go back to Solomon. And he was said to have magical powers to be able to control demons. But I mean, there are those that don't believe Solomon existed at all. So I guess we're kind of like, oh shit, which is it? But let's just hypothetically say we're going with the fact that he did. Because a lot of esoteric people don't believe it. But let's say he did, and let's say he was said to have control over demons, and the ring was the ring of the metaphor. What was that story exactly? The ring of the finger.
Oh wow! I mean, Solomon's an interesting character because if you go to Jewish mythology and you go to the Old Testament and you read any records that survived for him, he had 1,000 wives. So I'm
Who
sat
would
here.
do that to themselves?
Exactly, because that means he's had 1,000 mother-in-laws. So when all these people are going,
who would
hey,
do this to themselves?
yeah, he's the greatest magician ever to live. But by hell, with 1,000 mother-in-laws, you'd have to be, wouldn't you? You know what I mean? You'd have to be you would have to be the greatest magician that ever lived to survive
You would,
that.
because you'd have 2,000 females behind you.
Oh wow, that's
And we
1,000
mean
wives.
business.
Yeah, that's crazy, isn't
We
it?
do.
But anyway, he survived, so I presume he must have had some kind of magical power to get through all of that. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff attributed to Solomon because a lot of things in the old days when they were produced, it was fashionable to attach them to a figure of great history or authenticity or power or whatever. So a lot of the stuff out there does not survive from the time of Solomon. But there are one or two interesting bits that do go back. The Solomonic magic stuff does go back quite a long way. Most of it's probably 700, 800, 900 years, could even be 1,000 years old.
Well, you're getting to the keys of Solomon. There must be something.
Yeah. Again, that goes back further. I'm just thinking of surviving copies of the manuscript. The stuff that's in it is obviously older than the manuscript itself. I think probably that one actually goes back to Anglo-Saxon times, so that might be even older. You might be looking at 600, 700, 800 AD for the existence of that. But that's still like nearly 2,000 years after Solomon was alive, so we still don't fully know where all of that material originates. But yeah, there's just some interesting stuff out there. Yeah.
Well, there is. I think it goes back into sacred knowledge.
It does. Yeah, it does. Like I've already said, you can plow through this enormous, great library of stuff, or somewhere along the line, as a human being, you can kind of develop the keys, you can develop your skills, and some of that will come to you anyway. You'll get some of that information naturally as a progression as a human being. I was watching something the other day that was absolutely magical, and it was this. It was on the Facebook, I think it was, and someone had put this post on, and it was a lady singer, a young lady preparing to sing. Now, she was obviously a pop singer because she was getting ready for a pop video or something like that. And she's just, minding her own business. And the next minute, a baby hummingbird flies onto her costume and attaches itself immediately over her heart.
Oh.
And it sits there for a couple of minutes in this, sunning itself, and boom, off it goes. That's magic. Magic. And the transformation and the change on this young lady as a result of that, and presumably the performance that she then went on to give, will have been affected by that tiny little moment, little moment. I mean, a lot of folks that practice magic will say that they do attract animals, I attract cats. It's not because I smell of fish or anything like that. I just attract them. I don't know, wherever I go. Maybe it's because I've got 2 cats of my own. And the other thing is as well, I tend to rescue crows and ravens and things like that.
I love that.
I get on really well with them. I just seem to be able. I've had 5 at least, and we've just succeeded in rehabilitating another one.
I love that. They're messengers.
They are,
They're messengers, right?
Yeah.
They get a bad rap also.
Oh, they're amazing. Crows and ravens. It's because they used to clean up the battlefields because they'd eat anything that was dead because they eat carrion. So they're, birds of death, but they don't actually kill anything.
No, and they're said to be messengers from the other side as well.
Yeah, well, Odin has
amazing talkers. Yeah, there we go.
Yeah.
Odin.
Odin's
Exactly.
birds. They are incredible.
If you really research it, you'll see. I think they're like phenomenal talkers.
They are. Yeah, have a look at. Yeah, go on YouTube.
I've raised parrots, so I know. Listening to
I think the world record was over 60 recognizable words for a crow to have.
That's amazing.
But the last one we rescued, he used to be able to say hello, and then he stopped. His main claim to fame was the fact that he used to drink whiskey and Coke. And then stagger across your knee and fall off, So we couldn't release him into the wild. He's ended up going to a bird sanctuary because we have a couple of pubs at the back here. So you can imagine what would happen. You let him out of the back door, next minute he's down the pub having a pint, annoying the punters. So we just couldn't let him out. So he's ended up. I
can imagine the people having a few drinks and you have a bird looking at you and
imagine that
to the wind going, hello.
Down it comes, and sticks its head in your glass and starts drinking your whatever it is you've got, So if anybody this Halloween gets pestered by a crow, chances are it's the one we've got or had. We just had, right?
Doing his thing. Yeah, that is so funny. I once met a robin, a baby robin that could speak. A friend of mine at the time, she would train birds, and she could train any bird to speak. And I was sitting, she had one of my parrots that unbeknownst to me, I rescued, and it was whoever the owners were bought a wild one, and they brought it in, and I ended up with this rescue through one of the humane societies, and it was wild. You couldn't touch it, but she would tame birds very, very gently. And so I came over to check on him one day, and all I hear is this tiny little hello, hello. And I'm going, what the hell's that? Because it was teeny, it was a baby. And I'm going, what the heck? What am I hearing? I'm staring at the bird's staring at me. He's not talking.
That's amazing.
I know when I looked down, there's this teeny little robin. His nestmates plucked all his feathers off his head, and his ball can be all tough with feathers. He's going, hello. I was like, oh my God, a robin's talking to me. I had to check myself. Nope, I'm just totally coherent right now. This is a robin talking to me. So
well, that's magic. There we go. That's magic. Right? That's what happens when human beings pay attention to their environment. You know, amazing things, absolutely amazing things happen that are just unimaginable. You know,
do you think that's part of the problem? We just all these signs and everything that's being left out there, and it's just we as humans are not paying attention to all of it?
Absolutely. I think most people walk around as if they're in a glass case, you know, like they're hermetically sealed in some kind of container, and the rest of the world around them's kind of going, boom, 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 let me in, let me in.
Here.
You know, we're here, hello, you know, and try to throw messages at us. But we're so kind of, you know, tunnel vision. I think a lot of people miss that. They really do miss out on that, which is a shame. I mean, you know, perhaps the device that some people are watching this on now is guilty of causing that as well. Mobile phones and, you know, palm tops.
It's designed to keep us stupid, I think.
Yeah, it's that focus. So
television.
It's nice that what we're talking about now actually is almost a reaction against that. What we're saying is, you know, switch your phone off, put your palm top down, shut the lid on your laptop, and go and sit in the woods for an afternoon.
Yes.
You know, it's waiting to happen. The magic is there. You know, it's waiting to happen.
Well, I think technology definitely has this way of ruining that. I mean, the ancients were very aware of all of this, and it seemed to be very natural in many ways. It's not something you necessarily had to do rituals for, unless, you know, you were getting more hardcore. But I mean, kings would go see oracles and seers and say, look, you know, am I going to win this battle? I want to know the details. You know, this is something that was very normal.
Yeah. I mean, that was what was it, Delphi, the oracle at Delphi, that one of the kings went down there and went, what's going to happen? And the oracle went, today a king will die on the battlefield. And of course, this idiot king assumed it was his opposition, and it wasn't. It was him. Hey, which teaches you something about magic, and that is, don't make assumptions. You know, you know, all these people
specifics, maybe.
Well, yeah, wherever your messages are coming from, you know, be it, you know, tarot or whatever, crystal ball, whatever. Don't make assumptions. You know, that's another big rule with stuff to do with that side of things. You know, just don't do that. Yeah.
Yeah. Bad idea. But so I guess then that it goes back to I guess if you're going back into the worshiping of different deities, let's face it, a lot of you know, the Old Testament deities were taken by the church, and demon, you know.
Yeah, so quite a few were.
Yeah. So in a way, it's been taken, I guess, from we as a populace.
Well, I mean, mind is cast back to, again, speaking magically, you know, if you'd have gone back, forget the 2000s, forget the 1900s, go back to the 1800s. If you'd gone back to Victorian times, you've got all these people. I mean, I'll make this relevant. You've got all these people invading America, and they're coming up against what are described as noble savages. You know, we are bringing Christianity, to conquer the savage inhabitants of this land. And all of a sudden now, 250 years later, we're thinking, no, these are not noble savages at all. They're actually 1,000,000 times more civilized than we ever were.
Yes.
They could live in the same spot for hundreds of years.
Yes.
And when they move, you don't know they've been there. That's civilization of an entirely different kind. And like you say, it's this harmonious relationship between them as living creatures and the living creatures and their environment around them. And we just go blundering in. I think we're still doing it now to certain societies around the world. We just blunder in and just blow all that apart. And then it takes hundreds of years for us to come all the way around to realize that actually, no, they were right in the first place. They were doing things that were genuinely magical. Their shamans were doing things relating to the environment and achieving things that we're only just waking up to now. We're only just realizing, that these things are even possible. A lot of people that were like that in the past now are no longer with us. They're gone. We've lost that element. It's almost like we started off and the environment of the planet that we were in, that was like, 98%. And we were like this little 2% that were part of it. And we've now tumbled it the other way. 98% of what goes on planet Earth is us. It's all about us. It's all about our technology and what we do and environmentalism and all the rest of it. And the planet and what's already here is that tiny little 2%. We've gone from one extreme all the way across to the other extreme. And we've done it in the space of probably 2,000 years, maybe. If you brought an ancient Egyptian back now, I don't think they'd recognize the planet or society or humans at all. They'd wonder what on earth had gone wrong. Some people do actually believe that we're living in hell now. Who am I to argue?
Purgatory, anyway.
Well, certainly, yeah.
Trying to get through the classroom. I don't want to do this again.
Why do we do
graduate.
This to people? Yeah. Why do we do this to people?
I know. It's like, come on. But then there are days it's like, okay, I'm skipping school today. It's like, no, not an option. So, but I think when we look at just getting back to magic, there's modern times. It's believed that elite people of the world who would be, I guess in arms with the Vatican, with really high up, because everything's at the Vatican. Let's face it, we've talked about that. Just to be a fly on the wall in the Vatican archives, I think it'd be a busy
have enough time to actually read them. Yeah,
that's what I'm saying. Yeah, like that's just where all the gold is, right there, with respects to information. But it's believed that they, along with many, of the most elite families, have this ancient knowledge of magic, and that the source, everything that we seek, is this knowledge. And so much of it has been kept from us because it wasn't for the common man, even though it used to be, even though it was, it was for everyone within the cultures and like, again, pagans and the Druids. This was quite normal. It was a way of life that you would go to these people, like our indigenous people would go to their shaman, like the knowledge was there of their ancestors was there, and it went back hundreds, if not thousands of years. And then everything just comes to an end, and it just seems to be that select people have this amazing knowledge, and wars have been fought over it. And
there's a few things I can add to that. I mean, the bit we're talking about revelation through life and through the world, that's called natural theology. It actually has a name.
Okay.
And that, if you like, is divine revelation through nature, through physical matter and physical existence, which you've got to say is available to everybody,
Right.
But that's what we've lost. So if you want a sort of grimoire, you want a holy book that everybody can read and understand, then it's that planet Earth and it's that natural theology. It's everything beyond, the glass case that we walk around encased in. It's everything else.
Right.
So that's one issue. One issue is it's there to be found if you go looking for it. The other issue, though, is the idea that everything that's been learned is hidden away somewhere. And there's two things that feed into that. First of all, I've met a lot of people over the years that you might regard as being high up in different organizations. And I'm thinking about it a lot. I met loads of people. And the ratio of intelligent people to people who are basically stupid is the same the further up the magical tree you go.
Right.
So let's say 10 people in every 100 are really switched on. Well, if you went to the Vatican, you'd find 10 of them out of every 100 of them were switched on. And the rest of them are just blundering along like the rest of us. So it's a bit of a misnomer to think that everybody in a high position is necessarily, one of the elect or one of the select few. Right. We've just had a storming example of it over here. We had a prime minister that's only lasted 45 days. She actually resigned today and packed in because Boris, the previous prime minister, he resigned, and now Liz Truss has resigned. So clearly the people that were around her and the government that she was supporting were somewhere in the other 90%. She hasn't had many of the 10% of people who really, cut it. Right. And unless it's all deliberate, which some people will argue, but my experience is it's not deliberate. There are people out there who genuinely don't have a clue what they're doing. And fortunately, they're in the majority. That's how it is. So that's worth bearing in mind. And the other thing worth bearing in mind as well, which is the second point, all the information that they've got available. So let's say probably every single book that's in the Vatican Library, at some point in history has leaked out. So there are books out there that are real, top shelf, high end magic. This works and you can put money on it type of books. They're actually out there, but either people don't know where to find them, or they can't be bothered to go and look, or they don't bother to read them when they find them. So it's not entirely these organizations' faults for hiding that data.
There are morsels of information out there.
Well, it's more than that. I mean, I'll tell you a personal story. I mentioned I started off in witchcraft by default, because that was the circles I was moving in. By the time I got to a teenager, I started to have more and more contact with Christianity, with the church. I converted just before my 16th birthday. And of course, when I'm converted, they say, well, don't you think you ought to read the Bible? And I'm like, oh, I don't want to read that. A load of nonsense, book of fairy tales and all the rest of it. And then I actually got my old copy. I got it off the shelf, the one that I had when I was at school. And I started flicking through it, and I'm thinking, this is the greatest book of shadows I've ever read. Now, well, a book of shadows is simply a book filled with people's life experiences in the realm of magic and worldliness and, what they've achieved and what works and what doesn't work. And I'm going through the Bible going, well, that's basically what this is. It's a book of shadows. But you think about how many people over the centuries have stopped people from going anywhere near that book. Most people have got the same idea I had, which is, a bunch of fairy tales, load of nonsense. It's just made up. But this is the crux of the matter. It's not. If you actually go through it and read it like a magician would read it, back to where we came in, or like a witch would read it, or a warlock, or someone in a secret society, it's amazing. There's some incredible stuff in there. I mean, even the 10 Commandments, they just tell you, if you do this, this will happen. Now, that's all they are. Do this, and this is going to be the result. I'll give you an example. This is a brilliant example of how things look absolutely nonsensical. There's one of the commandments is, honor thy father and thy mother, that thy days might be long in the land that the Lord gives you. And you think, hang on a minute, that's a load of nonsense. How can, me keeping on the right side of mum and dad mean that I'm going to live longer? I don't get the connection. But then if you look at it from a sort of a life and a magic point of view, and you think, well, hang on a minute, mum and dad have already been here for 10, 20, 30, 40 years longer than me. They've got more experience than me.
Right.
And they also knew the generations that were alive before I was alive.
Right.
So it's worth paying attention to what they know, because I'm going to avoid making the same mistakes.
Right.
All of a sudden, it makes sense. Of course, I'm going to live longer if I don't go and stick my head in a gas oven because Uncle John did it when he was 30 and died.
Right.
You know, it's that obvious.
That kind
when
of
it's
logic,
pointed out, you think, oh, hang on a minute, it does work. There is an equation behind that, and it makes perfect sense even in the 21st century. And that's what the Bible's like. It's just full of stuff like that. And it's because of the way it's been translated and the way people use it.
I think lost in translation is an easy way of looking at it.
They're stopping you by blocking you from going there.
Right.
You know,
because, I mean, some people, like personally, I would prefer more the Old Testament.
Yes.
Reading that, because I just find it, there's just more in it. It's just more, you know, I mean, the books aren't all left out. I personally enjoyed the Book of Enoch, for example.
Yeah.
I mean, he's your first alien abductee, technically, right? But
if you don't count Ezekiel, because you got Ezekiel with his whirling wheels.
Oh, exactly. That's what I'm saying. You know, like Jesus himself had all these experiences.
He was taken up and disappeared through the clouds. That is a nice trick if you can do it. Believe me, I wouldn't mind doing that. Much better read,
I find, than the first or this, you know, the New Testament personally. If you know, but I think this is where people sort of get lost, is you have all these theologians and all these people who are maybe not translating it properly. Some people believe, you know, like the Red Sea was a sea of reeds, and like, you know, it's like, it's hard to go back and say exactly what was what. But then you have these great things like the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, and how they found this location, and how archaeology is finding
it backs it up. It tends to back it up. I'll give you another good example, actually, because this one will probably pop a few heads out there. But we've now got this thing, the Church of Satan, which clearly exists. You know, Anton LaVey was its leader. You know, and it's out there, and the references and the material that they use to create what they create in terms of their writings and the things they study, and a lot of what they did was fished out of the Bible. There are 680 references in the Bible to those kind of things, you know, Satan, hell, all this sort of thing. And all they did was just go back to those old manuscripts and pull that information out and regenerate it.
Well, it was a lot of self-indulgence, right? To make it more about honoring yourself, I think, then.
And also to create this dualism, this black and white, hell and heaven, devil and God, you know, the whole kind of that was something that they wanted to achieve, which they did, which we're stuck with it now. But what the kind of the point I'm making is a lot of the magical stuff, you know, Solomon is a biblical character. So a lot of the stuff that you find, ancient Hebrews used a lot in magical rites, as is Greek, Latin, and one or two of the other old languages. So a lot of what we're using is based on what we've already got. But we're only using it if it works.
Right.
If it's true and it finds its way into, you know, some other book, just because it's in that book and it's in the Bible doesn't make it not true.
Right.
You know, it's kind of, that's kind of, the Bible's, like you say, we've got the Bible, we've got the Apocrypha, we've got the Dead Sea Scrolls, we've got the Nag Hammadi Library, we've got all these Gospels that are left over. And then, if you really want to take a run at it, you've got the entire contents of the Vatican basement, you know, the Vatican Library. All this material's out there, and it all comes from somewhere. But the bottom line is, does it work, and what does it achieve? You know, where does it take us? Where is it getting us? You know.
Well, look at the ancient library they just located in Romania. There's another one they're surfacing. You know, the Library of Alexandria, which unfortunately so much was lost. There's a lot of that, I think, that got hidden. Dead Sea Scrolls. Let's think about how those got found. The Gnostic texts. You know, there's a lot of stuff that was just, I think, hidden and will eventually surface, and maybe we can.
I mean, we're lucky with the stuff that wasn't destroyed, basically, because various different, you know, religions and theologies in the past have not been accommodating, shall we say, to material that they should have been, and they've kind of knocked a lot of it out and destroyed a lot of it. I mean, there's probably most folks don't realise, but some of the biggest untranslated libraries of stuff that we've got that have survived are in Africa. some of the Coptic libraries that are in places like Ethiopia and that, and
Yes.
go into the body of, as they call it, Darkest Africa, go in there. There's entire libraries of thousands of handwritten manuscripts out there. And most people don't even know they exist. They don't even know they're there.
Wow. Fabulous.
And a lot of them were written very, very early on, 1,000 years, 1,500, 2,000 years back. And a lot of them were preserved and copied by religious communities. The only snag there is with a lot of the African revolutionaries and political uprisings and what have you, a lot of the libraries are getting burnt. They are destroying them. And I think there's a concerted effort now amongst the international archaeological and literary community to try and do something about that. But that's just Africa. I mean, you mentioned Romania,
Yes.
What else is hiding in places like Egypt? Or South America, that's still waiting to be found, all over the planet, this stuff's still out there. Where is that going to take us? We're back on the subject of magic again, brings us round again. It will change our reality. It'll certainly change our view of the past. I'm convinced.
I think so. I'd like to see it more open to everyone. There's just a lot of stuff that isn't, and maybe that's with good reason. Imagine some people who, have like this, using their finger as a bad weapon.
Going back to Halloween again. I mean, can you imagine that you find this dusty old manuscript, looks like something out of Raiders of the Lost Ark. You find it in a cave in the desert. This manuscript gives you the formula for raising people from the dead. So you go, wow, what amazing power. You know what I mean? You go running around on the 31st of October, going around cemeteries going, right, you can come back. You can come back. You can come. You imagine the terror and confusion and chaos that would result from somebody absolutely uncontrolled, just putting something they've learned into practice. Well, let's have a go at this, totally irresponsible, it'd be like a zombie apocalypse, which probably Halloween is in America. There's lots of zombies, I believe, that you have out there.
I'm sure there's a few.
If anybody knocks on my front door, I tend to open it dressed in a big black cloak and just go, "Hello, can I help you?" And then all the zombies,
drinking bird.
All the zombies then turn into zombies. And zombies are zombies that move very quickly and they run away from you. They go off like a shot, So we have zombies around here, fast-moving ones. You can imagine though, magic used irresponsibly, would just create absolute chaos.
I can see that. What do you think? I mean, I know for me the question is obvious. For some others, like practitioners, it would be obvious. For laymen, maybe not. When we start getting back into, throughout medieval ages, the Inquisition, and then it followed here, obviously, to the New World, Salem, I mean, they were looking at people who were just horticulturists, naturopaths, people now who we would say were just, finding natural way of life. But, they were, again, trying to either prove a point, control the masses, and the logic. We're going to throw you in the water. If you sink, you're dead anyway. Right?
Maleficarum,
That's what I'm saying. Like, there was just no real logic behind the methods. What do you think? And again, this started way off, obviously in Europe and found its way here.
Well, where I am, we have the Lancashire witch trials, which came just before Salem. So actually, you and I are both very much in the same position, having that kind of thing within a stone's throw of where we are. The Lancashire witch trials were interesting because all the ladies, most of them were ladies, were essentially bordering on Protestants. And a lot of the landowners and the people that condemned them and burnt them were Catholics. So when you look at the background over here, hang on a minute. Sorry, that ice cube went down the wrong hole. When you look at the background over here, it was a political land grab. It was two different factions kind of, getting into it. So I'd imagine something very similar was happening in America.
Yes.
Where there were disagreements, in ownership and in authority. Who's got the authority to do what. So no matter how magical we might think it was, in terms of persecution of people who are clever or powerful or knowledgeable. The bottom line is it comes down to a lot more basic human traits, I think. I want that farm over there, so I'll accuse the family of being witches. Get the farmers out the way, we'll have it. Over here, I mentioned Melis Maleficarum, which says some of the legislation that came after that in the 1600s said that if you identified a witch, basically the local authority got a third of the possessions, the judge that judged them got a third of their possessions, and the accuser got a third of their possessions.
So there was a lot of incentive to accuse.
Around Pendle. I mean, half the land changed hands in the early 1600s around Pendle, where the Lancashire witches came from, simply because they were punching out these Protestant families, these witch families, and taking control or taking back control of the land that they wanted, and just dividing it up amongst themselves. And like you say, some of the, if you go down in a ducking stool and you drowned, you were guilty. But if you survived, you were magical, so you were guilty. And like sticking pins in people, if you didn't scream, you were guilty because you didn't feel pain.
It was lose-lose. You didn't stand a chance. Yeah,
you've had it. You've just had it. So, it was very much a recipe for people just getting what they wanted at the end of the day.
Right.
Which is it's just really sad, like you say, a lot of very clever natural practitioners of the time, herbalists and what have you, and medics and midwives and you name it. A lot of people that would have been a real asset to the community just disappeared. They were lost. I think in the 1500s as well, there was this thing where they started producing guilds. So like you had a guild of doctors, a guild of barber surgeons, they grouped together into guilds and colleges. If you weren't part of that establishment, then you were targeted. So you get a lot of that in the 15 and 1600s as well. So if there's a really stonking doctor in a village somewhere, but they're not part of, the establishment college, then they were persecuted. They were accused of the craft and chucked out, So invariably, if you dig deep enough, you will find this kind of thing. The witch trials in America, it's a shame really, because Salem in particular, the judge who actually passed the sentences actually said at the end of it, I was cornered, I was forced into doing this and I deeply regret it, and he went on record as saying that before he died.
Wow.
So the more you dig, the more you find that it's, people having a go at people, any excuse for a war, no matter how big or small, I guess.
Still,
nothing changes.
No,
nothing changes.
No, exactly. I know there's a lot of stories, throughout the Middle Ages. Countess Elizabeth Bathory was another who was extremely land wealthy and independent. When her husband died, she's just like, no, I don't want another husband. All of these suitors were turned away. So basically a couple turned on her and, we all know the stories, but there's not a whole lot of actual evidence as to all these alleged.
Well, no, I mean, Cathedral Castle, which is Elizabeth Bathory's castle, they've excavated. They've gone around that castle. They didn't dig up a dungeon full of skeletons. There's no enormous pits full of victims. I mean, the accusation was that she'd when they broke into the castle, apparently there was 680 victims in the castle. But there's nothing has ever come forward as physical evidence for that. Even the room that she was walled up in, has never been found. So
there you go.
Very, very difficult to nail that one down.
There was propaganda even back then. They wanted her money, they wanted her wealth, her lands, and
they say history is written by the victor. Whoever is the winner in the end of the conflict tends to get the chance to write the history, which kind of goes back to where we came in with the King Arthur book. There's been too many people down the years have reworked that, rewritten it, put their own politics in it, adopted it for their family. It's ended up being used for royalty, to justify all kinds of things happening in hundreds and hundreds of years. But what I've done in the book is tried to get back to what it was at the beginning. Where did it all start? Where did it come from? What material we got that survived that kind of cheese grater of time, that just shreds everything.
So,
But that's true of everything, like you say. It's true.
Everything gets lost in translation when you have too many hands in the pot, sort of thing.
Yeah. There is a magical dimension, though, to things biblical. If anyone gets a chance to check out a guy called Ivan Panin, who was alive in the 1920s, 1930s, he came up with septenary design. And septenary design is what happens when you convert Greek, Aramaic, and Hebrew back to numbers, because they all have numerical equivalents. And when you go back, you get thousands and thousands of codes that are hidden, if you like, in the numbers. So it's called septenary design because the easiest one to spot's God, because it's divisible by 7. So very often you'll get the word God spelled out over lines and lines by every 7th interval. That's how he spotted it, because he was a mathematician and he noticed this pattern. But in the 1990s, the good old Jewish race banged the whole lot into a computer. And after 3.5 years, when this thing had finished chugging out codes, they just couldn't believe it, because it's not reproducible. So when you pick up, say, I don't know, Book of Isaiah or whatever, when you read that, if you can read it in the original Hebrew, there's nobody alive today that can write like that.
Wow.
Impossible. It's beyond humans and machines to be able to produce that. It's kind of, in magical circles, because I'm blowing the lid off this, in magical circles, it's known as the fingerprint of God.
Right.
And you can, a lot of the mentioned, like the extra canonical books, the extra stuff that was left over and not included, there are bits of code in those, but they don't conform right the way through to code. So when they actually put all the manuscripts together and decided to call it this book, which ones were right and which ones were wrong. So it's a technique we've lost in the last 1,500 years. It's not long disappeared.
Right.
Cat, by the way, this
hello. Hello.
Amazing, aren't they? You just, that's now there's a tale. Sorry, I couldn't resist that.
That's okay.
I just didn't want anybody out there to think I'd suddenly grown this strange
the cat whisperer over here.
I don't know where he's gone now. He's disappeared somewhere in the room.
He's had his 2 seconds of fame. It's like, all right.
What's Halloween without a cat? You need a black cat on Halloween.
It's true. It's true. I agree. Getting back to the translation and the codes, do you think, I'm just playing, and probably not the best choice of words, I'm just playing devil's advocate with the Bible and all these codes in there, not humanly possible to translate. But what about extraterrestrial?
Well, now you're well and truly on that Crystal Skulls and Human Heads book, which I've just produced. There's another advert. Please dash out and buy it, because that kind of comes to a very similar conclusion. That there's no reason why the Creator, the Almighty, even if it's omnipotent, omnipresent, even if it's still here, there's no reason why we shouldn't regard that as being alien to us. Because let's face it, it is. It's not us. Whatever God with a big G or a little g, or Allah or whatever label you want to stick on it, whatever's behind all of this, it's considerably bigger than we are. It's a lot more than us. That's the starting point, if you like, of magic, wisdom, religion, belief, whatever you want to label it as. At the end of the day, as human beings, that's where it begins, the realization that, by gum, there's something out there bigger than us, and it's there. And as I said, natural theology tells you it is, because mathematics is everywhere.
It's true.
Absolutely.
Nikola Tesla was everything was mathematics. Right.
Look what's creeping in at the background.
I see. I know. It's like, I want my.
Here we go. Look, I wondered how long it'd take. There you go. There you go. Oh, my little catastrophe. He's just cleared off.
I want my minute.
There you go.
Get out of my way. I'm stealing the show.
30 seconds of fame. Nobody's going to comment. Nobody's going to comment on the show at all now. You'll just get thousands of emails going, "What's the name of the cat?"
I know. You know, who's your guest? No, the furry one. No, the really furry one.
Right, well, I'm not going to tell you now. I'm not going to tell you what his name is. You can see what happens.
Oh my gosh. So while we're talking about extraterrestrials, while we're talking about magic, everything else, let's talk about mystical beings.
Right, okay.
You know, such as, I mean, we touched on a little bit the last time, but vampires, werewolves, all these beings who we might deem, are they cryptid? Are they extraterrestrial? Do they just travel in and out of portals? Do they, because we'll use vampires just as an example. There are reports of them all over the bloody world going back to ancient times.
Yeah.
There's something there. This isn't just a made up thing. You know what I mean? This is a hearty belief.
Well, it is a belief of biblical proportions, because it goes back to, I think it's in Genesis, where it actually says the life is in the blood. Yes. And now we understand that. Now we understand that in the 21st century as science, because it is. You know, our very existence, the very fact we're here, is based on the existence of our blood. You know, as soon as something goes wrong with it, or you take it out of somebody, or there isn't enough of it, or whatever, that strange red ironous substance is what's keeping us going. You know, get rid of that and you're in trouble. You know, you've got problems. That really is where it all begins, there and Babylon. Because
Babylon, everything starts in bloody Babylon.
Yeah, Hecate and Lilith and all the early goddesses and the early gods that were there at that time. There is this life and death tension between this world and the next, and then somewhere in the middle you've got this in between, and it starts there. So like the goddess of the witches now is Hecate, the goddess of vampires is Lilith. Which is interesting, because in both cases, the original symbol for vampires was an owl, not a bat. So that is secret. It was an owl. Yes, it was an owl. So creatures of the night, they're silent, they fly, you know, they eat flesh, and they represent, guess what? Wisdom, you know, and knowledge and longevity. And that's what they are. And they screech and they howl in the desert at night and things like that. So that's really the origins of where this whole vampire thing comes from. If you want to look at the oldest story, I mean, everybody kind of goes back to whatever relatively recent history for vampires, but the oldest one is actually an Irish chieftain called a Bartact, and he was alive in the 400s. So you're going back over 1,600 years, and he was brought back to life. And what they had to do with him was stake him through the heart with yew wood. They had to bury him upside down under a rock. They surrounded his grave with thorns, which he had to pick up before he could come out. And every time they killed him, he kept coming back. So the formula, if you like, the Bram Stoker formula, is there in that particular story in Ireland, going back quite a long way. So you can trace this back 2,500, 3,000 years. And like you say, it's all over the world. Now, combining it with the other question you asked, which is about things being interdimensional, it's an interesting one, because vampirism is generally thought to be a physical thing or disorder or whatever. People who perhaps required blood to survive, people who were anemic, people with blood allergies that cause them to react to sunlight. There are so many physical attributes that they think brought about this idea of vampires, you know, in the past. Combination of people adding different beliefs to what is a physical medical condition. And if you're being completely purist about it, then it still is the same now. The vampires we've got now that have formed into houses and they've formed into societies are people of that belief system who generally drink or consume body fluids. They change the teeth to pointed teeth, and they follow that particular creed, and they group together. So it's a physical thing. You know, it's actually a sort of physical thing. When you start getting into other things, though, and now you're into cryptid territory now, flip to the next one in the row. The next one in the line is werewolves, because they overlap with vampires. In the ancient days, a lot of what was believed about vampires was believed about werewolves. The two are almost interchangeable. Vampires can turn into werewolves, and werewolves in the past were regarded as being vampires. Vampirus, is there such a word? You know, so they had this overlap. Werewolves are different because you're in cryptid territory. There is the possibility that somewhere there is a portal or a dimensional shift or a gateway, or maybe just a kind of a shimmer in creation that brings these things like werewolves through, which may be very much like Bigfoot and other things like that. They may be a survival of our past. So once upon a time, long, long ago, you know, goodness knows how many thousand years, there could have been wolves, dogs, large creatures that were capable of moving on 2 feet as well as 4. And that's what we're seeing. You know, there is that element.
There's a lot of sightings, and they vary. You know, you have your like dogman type, which are very muscular, 2 legs, but full on animal. You have your I guess skinwalker type. You have, like, I know here we have them. They're just long. They're lanky, really long limbs. They're lanky. They lope. They don't run. They've got these really long snouts, and some of them have been known to just stop, get up, and walk on those 2 long lanky legs of theirs.
There's an American account that I read fairly recently of somebody who stopped the car because there's this massive thing in front of them, which they assumed to be a Bigfoot, because it looked like a Bigfoot. It's about 9 foot tall, massive, big, furry thing. So they put the headlights on full beam and suddenly realised it's not a Bigfoot. It's actually a socking great big wolf stood on its back legs. So at this point, they're even more terrified than they were, you know, a moment before. But this thing turns, and as it runs off the road, vanishes into something. Now, they couldn't describe quite. They described it as it almost went through a door. You know, as it ran off the road, it literally just went bump and vanished. It never went into the bushes. It never disturbed the trees or the grass. It just disappeared as it ran off the road.
Yeah.
So you're into this realm of, you know, is it physical? Is it not physical? You know, are these things surviving species that come from an archaeological context? Do they still exist? Are they survivors, you know, like things that have not gone extinct? Or you're in there with your fairies, you're in there with Mothman, you're in there with, you know, little green men that appear and disappear, elves, you know, UFOs that are there 1 minute and gone the next, you know, where are we with this, you know, dimensional thing, which touches again on where we came in with Ouija boards and that, where is this dimension? What are we talking to? You know, where are the spirits? Where are all these things out there? Where do they exist? Is there, you know, it's almost like, you know, if we can think of it and we can invent it, next minute it turns up from somewhere. So some people believe it's like a realm of creativity. I think Del Toro, who did Pan's Labyrinth, I think he's got a very similar belief to this idea that you can create things which then kind of get dumped into this holding area, which are then
like
created. Basically you've got, it's like a huge cupboard full of curiosities that over many millennia humans have created, and they're out there, and every so often the veil, you know, goes thin, like it does on Halloween. You know, it's during the chimes of midnight on Halloween night, it's said if you get within audio distance of a clock that actually chimes, from the first chime to the last chime, that is the point at which the dead are closer to the living than at any other point in the year. That's the belief. And it's that beyond the veil, you know, it's that veil idea again, or in 21st century language, beyond the dimension, beyond the portal, you know, somewhere else. It's going to be a real tough one to nail this one down, because it's the direction. Actually, I was at a UFO conference in Manchester, the Expo, Awakening Expo, last weekend, and there were 4 speakers on there. We had Whitley Strieber, we had a couple of other really famous guys, but the general consensus was that the UFO community needs to stop being the UFO community and start looking at everything else in relation to UFOs. So ghosts, poltergeists, apparitions, portals, appearances, cryptozoology, all these different subjects might all be the same thing. And that was a consensus.
So.
Yeah, it was a consensus among the speakers. So maybe that's one of these things coming out of the nonsense we've had the last few years and coming into a brave new world, the kind of the realization that we need to get together and talk about our future. It's all part of that, where I think people are realizing they're not all separate compartmentalized issues. They're not all separate, Right. The same portal one thing's coming through basically could be the same portal something else is coming through. Depending on how big you look at it as a subject, you've got little Johnny who's 6 years old, is walking past the cemetery, when it's going dark on Halloween and he sees a white thing come out of a grave.
Right.
That it's almost the same thing as them turning on the CERN reactor in France and something coming through the CERN reactor, because the stories coming out of CERN that they've disturbed something, that there's been a dimensional shift,
Sure, threw us into an alternate reality, apparently, and
maybe it's all coming from the same place,
that I could see that they just threw us maybe into their reality, because there's a lot more.
It's it's
sightings
big.
And okay, in all fairness, we do have internet now. We have cameras. Every phone's got a camera. So we're capturing things a lot more easily than, let's say, in the past. But there just seems to be an influx, and I am a believer in the whole portal or dimensional bleed through thing. I would always laugh because my producer would always say, "No, there's no ghosts. It's just dimensional bleed through." And I go, "Ooh, dimensional bleed through." But then I started thinking about it, and I'm like, you know what? It could very well be
dimension theory. That's what we need.
Well, yeah, because I had a guest say to me, "You know what? Okay, I understand spirits coming through. But how do they manifest clothing? How do they manifest, for example, a bicycle that they bring through with them?" My answer was, well, maybe they're projecting what they want us to see. Maybe they aren't really wearing this. Maybe they don't really have that bicycle. Maybe it's just a projection of what they want us to perceive them as, see them as.
There's two ways. There's two ways of looking at that. The first one is, are they coming through in a fashion that we can accept? In which case, they're using what we know to generate what we see.
Of course.
Which would make us. That would basically make us the origin of that. So that's the observer element of it. Are they reliant on us as observers to come through the way they do? But then there's the other side of it, which says, if all they are is made up of particles of some kind or waveforms of some kind or light, then they can come through as anything they want. They can come through in any way they like and do anything.
That's also true.
That's infinitely possible. So it could be either, maybe it's entirely them, or it's entirely us, or it's somewhere in the middle. Maybe it's a bit of both.
The cryptid thing is to me fascinating, because thinking about Nessie, Loch Ness, they can never seem to find any trace of it. But what if it is a portal and they just come in and they come out? That to me makes the most viable sense.
Yeah. Well, it's
because of where it is.
Yeah, I mean, if a UFO from thousands of years in the future gets through the portal, why can't we have a plesiosaur from several thousand years, million years back doing the same thing? Einstein was a firm believer that all time, no matter what time it is, exists at once. So if you look at it that way, if everything that is ever going to exist is all existent at the same time, and then the actual limitation of time begins to break down, then you basically got the situation we're living in. Things can pop through from anywhere. In Crystal Skulls and Human Heads, I actually think UFOs are people from our past. I don't think they're from the future, because if they come through, they're going to damage the future, and they'd be damaging their own future. But if they're coming through from the past to see where we're up to, that kind of makes sense. And maybe we are going through some kind of enormous change fairly soon that they know about, but we don't know about.
Maybe they've already been here. Maybe they've been here the whole way.
Yeah, maybe they never went away. Back to this idea of time and space.
Maybe they're in our mountains because you see them going into volcanoes. Maybe they're in our oceans. Maybe they're underground. Maybe they're not. They shoot up to the stars, but maybe that's not where they're coming from. That's also another perception of
that's space. So now you've introduced the idea of distance. If time is no longer relevant, and then space is no longer relevant, when the kids knock on your front door and one's dressed as Yoda and the other one's dressed as the Loch Ness Monster, you can still give them sweets. Because you've got the unified theory. Perfectly valid. I thought I had to bring it back to Halloween, didn't I? I had to get it back to Halloween somehow. It didn't really matter what they turn up as, because at the end of the day, it's all valid.
I like it. I have to do a very quick sponsor and station ID. To those tuning in, you are listening to the Outer Realm Radio, and we are broadcasting on United Public Radio Network and UFO Paranormal Radio Network 105.3 FM in New Orleans. We're fully sponsored by the amazing people over at Folgers Coffee and Justin Snicker, the sonic surgeon, who's responsible for our intro and our outro, and you can find his music anywhere that good music can be found. It is Halloween time, guys, and he is just putting out all kinds of new stuff right now. So go check him out on Instagram and check him out on Facebook, because he puts it available so you guys can all go and get a little taste of it. Tonight we are joined by Mark Olly, and as always, it is a super interesting conversation, which just takes us all over the place and wealth of information. And I love bouncing ideas around with things like this, because
I don't know how we do it, because we get in the sort of flow of things, and then we go off all over the place, but we still manage to stay on the subject.
I know.
How do we do that? Magic. That's how we do it.
It is magic, and here
it's
we are
magic.
again.
Absolutely, it's magic.
I know, I love it. But getting back to vampires real quick as well, I think one of the most recent accounts is the Count Saint-Germain.
Yes,
and that seems to be one. I think the last sighting of him was in the 80s in New Orleans.
I've got photographs of him actually. I think the earliest photo of him I've got is 1930s. Right. I think the original count is an oil painting. I think he starts off as an oil painting. But there's photos of him in the 1930s, 1940s, 1950s. Like you say, I think the last photograph was late 1980. I think it was 1989 or something. But it's still in black and white, the one I've got anyway. If he was out there, though, this is interesting. If he had a decent haircut and he wore modern day clothing.
A decent haircut. What were you saying? It wasn't?
Well, 1980s. I mean, he looked like a 1980s bloke.
If he blends in.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Walking down the street with a mobile phone, you'd have absolutely no idea who he was. You know, he's got one of those faces that kind of fits in, wherever he goes. So he could still be out there. Not sure he's necessarily a vampire, though. He was thought to be an alchemist who discovered the egg. The egg that keeps you alive. What's it called? It's gone out of my head now. It was in Harry Potter. Anyway, this divine stone, philosopher's stone. That's what I'm looking for.
Stone,
shaped like an egg. It's like the egg of life. That's the description of the philosopher's stone. And once you've got that through alchemy, it grants the owner eternal life. So you basically don't die and you don't age. I wouldn't say he was on the same level of Elizabeth Bathory. He's not going home to a bath full of virgin's blood, every night.
No.
I don't think that's quite how he operated. He was just this strange being that didn't seem to get any older.
But he was also said to be connected with the Rosicrucians, the Freemasons, the Illuminati, the Knights Templar, and just to mention a few.
If you live that long, I suppose you get the opportunity to do that. When you're sort of my age, you start to realize that you're running out of time, and there's more stuff than you've got time to get through. And I've spent a lifetime of wading through stuff, but
it sure gives you the opportunity. I mean, if all of these secret societies are made privy to this sort of sacred knowledge, or even knowledge of esoteric and occult magic, it could make you realized pretty darn quick that he may have picked up a thing or two.
I think at the top of the tree, there's a small number of people in all of the societies out there that you know, the 10% or whatever, who know, you know, they really, they've done it. Somehow they've got the right knowledge in the right way, and it's working for them.
Right.
Who they are and whether you'd ever get to meet them, I don't know.
Yeah.
If that was me and I was in their position, I'd make sure that you didn't know that I was one of them.
No.
Because on a kind of global scale, you know, that would not necessarily be a good thing. I mean, I'll give you a prime example. You know, probably greatest magician that ever lived was Jesus, and look what we did to him.
Right.
I rest my case.
I know, right there.
You know, and you
become
could look
any
pick any occultic you like from any time period, and
Yeah.
none of them get treated particularly well. You know, it's one of them things where, you know, I'm sure if you're like, you know, the head of the OTO or the head of Church of Satan or whatever, when you go into McDonald's and you buy a McDonald's, you don't want everybody in the shop to shuffle away and walk out. You know, that's not life. You know, it's not living. So I think you would keep your identity fairly close to your chest if you were at that level. I mean, you could say, you know, people in government, people in, you know, Congress, maybe people in religious power in the church, Catholics or whatever, even the people you see at a very high level, I have my doubts that they are magically, and I do use that word magically, high up. Because if you are magical of that level and you are that good at it, you don't need a position, you don't need the PR, and you don't need that entire organization underneath you. You know, if you're a magician,
you're really power hungry, you know, but you're still not going to tip your hand. You're just going to put yourself in a political situation or in a position of you know, authority more than anything. But I don't think anyone would tip their hand as
I don't know. That's kind of down here looking up. I think if you got in a position, a real position of power, you wouldn't necessarily need anybody or need support. But in order to arrive at the position where you were that powerful, you would somewhere along the line, you would have to start to get rid of ego. Anyone that's involved in magic will tell you, you've got to get yourself out of the way.
Right.
That's the beginning of power. The start on that road to power is to get rid of everything that you've got in terms of baggage. And the biggest piece of baggage is you. So if you've got this amazing egotistical thing where you've got to stand and, you know, and smile in front of the cameras and the photographers and always be in control and this, that, and the other, you know, it's wrong. That doesn't sit right with me magically, you know. If you can already control your environment, you can control the people around you. You don't need to try and prove it. You know, you don't.
I agree.
You know, it literally gets to the point where you go off the top of the chart. And that's why you don't know these people are out there. I'm sure there are these people out there.
Well, so there's no doubt, because there's some pretty extraordinary things that do happen, and you're never going to be made privy to it. I found the Count Saint Germain story to be interesting because of all these connections that we spoke about with magic, and here it is, an alleged vampire.
Oh, they've labeled him as a vampire.
Yes, yeah, they have, and who allegedly committed suicide in 1983 in New Orleans, and they have an address for him in New Orleans. Everything, like they did label him as more of this modern day.
This is where the internet doesn't necessarily work out, because I've got a book that was published in the 1980s, one of these world mystery books. I think it was published in '89. Yeah, and it has a photo of Count Saint Germain in Paris in 1989. Right. So he couldn't possibly have died in New Orleans in 83, because he was still alive 6 years later in France.
Yeah, well, there you go. Right. That's
now, the other.
These are just the theories. Like, they do have him down as an alchemist, of course, and but they just basically said the last sighting of him in New Orleans was there. But obviously, you know, he keeps going and going.
Yeah, if you live forever, why stop? You know, I wouldn't. You know, if he's cracked it, then he's still out there. I can guarantee that.
Right.
Yeah, he'll still be out there.
That's fascinating, though. That there's at least him. Maybe he's a time traveler.
Well, I was just thinking the same thing myself. Back to what we were talking about, dimensions. You know, if you've managed to somehow stop the clock,
Right.
so you're not wearing out and you're not dying anymore, is something to do with time and space, obviously. So we're back there again, who knows? Absolutely, who knows?
To say, life itself is magical, because here we are, we're these beings who are on this ball floating around in the cosmos, just with all these amazing things happening. We produce life. We have all of these amazing, other beings that we share space with, our pets, our animals, just these cryptids. There are things out there that are magical in their own right, despite what they are, what they may look like. I would not want to come up against a werewolf. I don't think that would be pleasant. We have stories of them nearby, and it's just like we've had one of those long lanky things just run by the front of the house here. It's like a little too close for comfort, but it's that in itself I look at as being really magical.
Yeah. I mean, from my point of view, as human beings, our first reaction, like you say, if you get a werewolf that suddenly knocks on your front door, your first reaction is to run away. Vampires run away. Ghosts run away. Cryptozoology, you name it, any of them, Loch Ness Monster to goodness knows what, you run away. UFO comes down, we come in peace, we run away. That's what humans do. We're basically a bunch of scaredy cats. But at the end of the day, you'd almost have to get to the point where you don't do that, where you actually.
But do you think it's been bred into us, the fear?
Yeah, it's all flight, isn't it? Like you say, over many, many generations, hundreds of generations, we have this thing where if we're afraid of something, we run away.
But our ancestors weren't.
To a lesser degree, I think they were a lot less scared of things. I think they understood the difference between, if it's a physical, gigantic dire wolf just got you pinned at the back of the cave, then you're in trouble. But if it's not physical, if it's something coming through, I think they could tell the difference. It comes from, it's like, you talk to farmers who've spent their entire life outdoors, in the countryside, and they tell you things that appear to be magical. They know things about their environment that only they would know because they're in it. And I think in the past, the ancient races of humans were the same. They had absolute, complete, encyclopedic knowledge about where they lived, because obviously for them it was life and death. You had to know if what was coming at you was real or not, or if that fungus would poison you, or what you could do to heal people and get benefit from that. Weather was about to do, in the next few hours, things like that. You need to know if you're going to survive in that environment. But like we've completely lost it. Point I was trying to make is, if a werewolf knocked on my front door, I'd open the front door. My first reaction would be to run, but then at every fibre of my being, I would try not to run because I want some answers. I'd want to know, and you've almost got to allow your curiosity to be greater than your fear. So,
but some of these beings are predatorial. Like I don't know how far you get with it. I say.
Well, I don't know, because somebody else was telling me a story at this UFO conference about they were being chased by what they perceived to be a werewolf, and there were 4 of them. They were all mates. They got a bit drunk. They got drunk on a railway line, and this happened in America. And all of a sudden, this thing came at them down the railway line, running down the railway line. And it chased them, and it was feeding on their fear. Well, the 4 of them are flying down this railway line, and of course the guy at the back falls over, doesn't he, like you see in the movies?
Of course.
The other 3 guys get about 200 yards further up the railway, and they start feeling guilty because they've left this guy behind. So they go back, and when they go back, they find him sat on the rails, just sat in the middle of the railway line, and they said to him, "What happened? Why are you still here? Why have you not been torn to shreds?" And he said, "Well, this werewolf thing," he said, "came thundering down this rail track." He said, "It got within striking distance of me, took one look at me, and realized that it was a standoff. I suddenly thought, well, I'm going to die anyway, so I'm not afraid anymore." And the werewolf must have been thinking, well, maybe this guy's a bit bigger than I am because he's not scared, and he's sat in the middle of the rails. And he said all this thing did was stop, turn around, and run off into the forest. Because So if you challenge these things, you might not get the reaction you think,
Right.
And there were 4 witnesses to that. So 4 witnesses saw that, they were involved in that encounter, and all their stories added up. But as soon as somebody actually had to come face to face with this thing, and it came right up to the back human being, as it were, the whole scenario just rewrote itself.
Mm-hmm.
Wolf turns around, runs off, guy's left sat in the middle of the railway track. So maybe we've got something wrong, maybe our energy and the way we're dealing with things, and our perception and the fear that we put into that, maybe that needs to be moved out of the way. Someone who's high up in magic, actually, one of these amazing guys you never get to meet, I'm sure they would be fearless. They wouldn't have anything to fear.
No.
Knowledge, truth sets you free. And I'm sure these guys are, probably sat there going, well, we know what that is and we know what this is. And, you never know, with a bit of luck, somebody might actually email in on this program and go, I'm one of those fellas. I know what werewolves are,
Right.
I'm sure we've got it wrong with this fight and flight thing. I'm sure.
I think maybe, I think maybe to a degree, when I just, think back to the ancient people, they certainly weren't afraid of extraterrestrials. I mean, all the way through, they've emulated them. They've put up monuments to them. They've, there's pictures of them, on like petroglyphs. There's so much, and yet here we are. I mean, the Old Testament speaks of him.
Yeah,
and yet
none of the information we've got would exist unless these guys first of all took it seriously, and second, actually took the time to investigate and write it down. None of that data would exist. So clearly they had at least a much more calm approach to it.
Right.
Maybe that comes from an understanding of their environment, that we've lost. They didn't automatically run away from everything they encountered.
Yeah, I agree. Food for thought.
Yeah.
I don't know.
So when you open the door to the kids and they're all dressed as vampires and ghosts, you don't have to slam the door and run away in terror. You can give them sweets as well.
Yeah. I don't run from God. There's not a lot I run away from, but I do know my limits. So
yeah.
But I mean, I do believe that mindset is everything. I do believe that energy is a food source for a lot of different entities, and for people too. They have what are called energy vampires, or they just feed off people. You have people who drain you.
Yeah, well, that's probably the most common vampire, which I didn't mention actually when we were talking about vampires, are the psychic vampires. People that walk into a room, there could be a happy party going on, and this massive cloud follows them in, and it just kills everything, and everybody just has a life sucked out of them. Yeah, they're out there. Yeah, I've met a few. You've probably met a few. There's probably lots of listeners probably know a few of these people, and you tend to avoid them, because they really are a damper on things. So they're out there.
Yes, absolutely. Well, it's definitely, it is the season for people to be keeping their eye out for, all these interesting beings that tend to come out when the veil is the thinnest. Mind you, there's a healthy belief that the veil has been thin or non-existent for many years now.
Yeah, some people think we're moving into a phase, if you like, of development where the barriers are sooner or later going to come down. So consequently, you've got people saying, well, if we switch CERN on, we're going to get things coming through from the other dimension. One day, the president's going to come out with a little green guy on the White House lawn, and go, look, they were here all along. It's that kind of openings, revelations, if you like, that people almost are expecting to happen now. And the world has gone that crazy over the last few years. It just wouldn't surprise me at all.
True.
Nothing surprises me anymore.
It's true.
So people are almost expecting a change of some kind.
Yes.
It'd be nice if it happened in our lifetimes. I'd love to see it. I'd love to. Back at the beginning of like 2 millennia ago, they had Jesus on planet Earth and all the disciples and, all that kind of thing. And it was the last phase of the Old Testament and all that kind of thing. But there was a big change going on in that first half of the first century of that particular millennium. We could be in the same position now. We're in the first century of a new millennium, and the expectation is very high. Kind of Jesus died somewhere in the 30s, 40s AD. We're not even there yet. We're not at 2040. We've not reached that point in our time period. So who knows? Is there a repeating pattern? What's coming? Let's hope it's as big as it can possibly get. I'd love to see it. I'd love to see it.
I am all for exciting things, and I am all for seeing evolution on different scales. But sometimes you just have to worry about the people at the helm. It's just a few bricks short of a load. And you're kind of going, I suppose I want this guy leading the pack.
If I've learned anything over the years, because I've had a lot to do with everything, magical, mystery, everything. And one thing I've learned over the years is that as long as it's not us, okay, so if it's coming from somewhere else, whatever your concept of power or divinity or interdimensional, whatever your concept is, it's not us. So if it's got good intentions, if it's benevolent, I think it would probably move us out of the way. So it doesn't matter. It's a bit like some of these alien movies you see, where as soon as the president or whoever's in charge of the country walks up to the spaceship, they just go and get rid of him. You know what I mean? It's like Mars Attacks. We come in peace, you're gone. Because metaphorically speaking, if we're the problem, then the problem needs moving out of the way so that these things that can do it better can get on with the job of doing it better. Or this thing that can do it better gets on with the job of doing it better. Yes, as human beings, we're going to doubt that. We'll question, is it demonic? Is it going to come and dominate us? Are we going to be invaded? Or, all these sci-fi movies, everything, they're always exploring that as a possibility. But what could we do about it anyway? At the end of the day, if it's bigger and better and, brighter and cleverer than us, then we've had it anyway. This thing is going to, it's going to take over anyway. So at least try and be its friend and not its enemy. That'd be a good starting point. I think it was the remake of The Day the World Stood Still, where Keanu Reeves is playing the main character, and he changes his attitude as he goes through the movie by realizing that we're not all bad. Well, this thing, whatever it is that brings about the change, probably already knows that. It's been around a long time. It's had plenty of time to watch what's going on. It could even be the thing that made us. So I just, my only advice to the entire of humanity is just make sure you're on the right side of it when it arrives. Get it on a good day, not a bad day.
I agree with you.
But it wouldn't worry me, if it's that powerful and it turns up, then it doesn't worry me.
No.
I mean, the worst thing that could possibly happen, and this is true of everybody, it's probably a really good conclusion. The worst thing that could possibly happen is that we die. But at the end of the day, we're going to do that anyway.
We are.
And that's the point, I guess, of Halloween. It's a brilliant conclusion to it all, because at the end of the day, everybody that has ever gone before us has died. And it is the Day of the Dead. That's what it is. It's the night devoted to the ancestors, the people that have gone, and one day that label will fit us. That's what we're going to be. But if the people who are still here can end up with a world that's better, by whatever means, then that's something we should want to happen. That's something we should be wishing for, So either you die because, some massive alien guy who's, a billion times better than us comes along and accidentally treads on you, or you die because you get too old. And then you go on to whatever the next thing is, whatever the next dimension,
the next level.
By which point we'll have the answers. If I get a chance to come back and do a radio show after I'm dead, I'll do it.
I'll bring you back.
Give me a ring. Well, that's where I'm going. Yeah.
Want to do something really cool right now? Do a radio show with the Ouija board.
Well, hopefully I'll be able to just come back and manifest, and you
can
go. Pull me on camera.
But that's
And you
just
can
for
ask me all the
theatrics.
questions you want then about the afterlife, you know.
I think we should do it. Don't go be in a hurry or anything, but I'm just
No,
saying.
no.
I
You
know.
have to wait till it happens for me to cross over, but there you go. But yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, that's like, you know, like they always say, what's the worst that can happen? Well, you know, the worst that can happen is you just duck out, you bow
Right.
out, and that's that. You know, there's not a lot we can do about that at the moment. You know,
No.
so
But in the meantime, enjoy the ride. Look
yeah,
at life as being magical,
yeah,
filled with magical beings, and don't fear everything.
yeah.
But a good scare is nice. You know, I love a good scare. And
Oh
around
yeah,
Halloween
yeah.
time is just, you know, it's
Don't lose the
always
boo
nice.
factor. Yeah,
No, I know. There we go. See, that's always good. But I always, I mean, I know it's your second time. I thoroughly enjoyed. We always have so much fun. We always just get so much covered.
yeah, yeah. And there's a few more to come. You know, I will return. We've
You,
intentionally kicked around a lot of dates, and
we have, we have.
here's
You're
to the
going to
next one.
be,
You know, here's to the next one.
yeah, you're going to be a regular face here on the Outer Realm and throughout 2023. And we're really looking forward to that. And can't wait to get into the new book. And there will be a show about that too, for all those wondering. And if you're flashing that cover, we need to know that there's a show coming. So, you know, but anyway, thank you so much. Have like a wonderful weekend. Have a great Halloween.
Yeah, definitely.
You know,
Same to all the folks out there as well. Yeah, have a belter, absolute belter. I'm jealous because I think New Orleans will just light up. You know, it's just going to be amazing out there.
oh, always. They go full on for sure,
Yeah.
you know. But I think, you know, North America just looks at Halloween so much different than many different parts of the world. It really is something that was really developed commercially here. You know, but I've had friends come over from Europe and the UK, and you know, it's Halloween. It's like, oh my God, it's a bloody spectacle here. I'm like, it is a freaking lifestyle here. Let me tell you what.
It's just to you, it's a major yearly festival. To us over here in the UK, it's just creepy.
Yeah,
that's about as far as it gets over here. It's just creepy, you know.
It should be creepy in the UK. The UK is creepy.
poorly done costumes and bad weather for a night, you know. That's what we get. We tend to just get that, and pumpkins. But we thank you for pumpkins.
Yes, you have to almost thank the Irish, though.
Yes, so they were doing turnips originally.
That's right.
So yeah, it comes from
That's
them.
right. And then they got here and went, you know what? These things work so much better.
Yeah.
Like, I know. And they get really big too, which is awesome. But anyway, thank you again for joining me.
Fabulous.
And again, Amelia sends her apologies, and she's not very happy right now. But you know,
we'll meet when the time's right.
There will. So thank you, and good night for you.
A pleasure. Good night.
Night, Mike. Well, guys, that was just an amazing, amazing interview. He is just so knowledgeable. He's so delightful. I am just so grateful that he's going to be spending more time with us here on the Outer Realm. So huge thank you to Mark Olly, and just a great conversation. Big thank you to Folgers Coffee, who sponsor the show tonight and every night. Thank you. Big thank you to Dr. Snick, Justin Snicker, for our intro and outro. We appreciate you so much. If you guys want to contact us, please, we only respond to email, theouterrealmcontact@gmail.com. That's theouterrealmcontact@gmail.com, or just go to the Facebook page, click on email, and it will come directly to us. If you enjoy the content, no matter which platform you are on, please subscribe, like, follow, join, whatever the case may be. We appreciate you so very much for showing us that support. So thank you. Next week, wow, another great week. Wednesday night brings the return of Brad Olson, and he's going to be discussing his, I think this is the last one of the series, which is Beyond Esoteric, Escaping the Prison Planet. Yes, excellent. See all these little ticky papers? Amazing book, just saying. So we are going to be talking about that. It is jam-packed with unbelievable stuff, so you're not going to want to miss this show. Thursday night welcomes for the very first time Ron Moorhead. And he's going to be discussing his book, Quantum Bigfoot. He has spent decades researching Bigfoot. He's done various media, including one of the latest, which was the Alaskan Killer Bigfoot. Yes. And it was a really amazing segment. I mean, sort of left me going, what? So definitely worth checking out. So until then, guys, behave yourselves. Amelia and I will see you guys in chat tonight. Good night.